The wind howled like something alive, sweeping through the canyons of red stone and thornbrush. A gray wall of rain chased across the desert, the kind that could drown a fire and swallow a soul. Clara Bennett's horse stumbled on the shale, lungs heaving, legs trembling. She had ridden too long, too far. Without rest, the storm was nearly on her now, and behind it men. She could still hear the faint echo of a gunshot somewhere miles back. Carried on the wind, her breath came ragged. The mare snorted, slipping again, and Clara slid off before the animal fell. Easy, girl, easy, she whispered. Though her own voice trembled, the horse's flanks steamed with sweat and fear. They had taken everything from her, the land her husband left behind, the roof over her head, the safety she thought she'd earned, all because she refused to marry her brother-in-law, a man more cruel than the desert itself. He'd sent men to bring her home, but she'd rather die out here among coyotes and spirits than go back. Lightning split the sky in that flash. Clara saw it, a small rise of smoke twisting through the rain. Faint but real, a campfire. She stumbled toward it, dragging her saddlebag, boots sinking in red mud. Her skirts were torn to the knee, her hair plastered to her cheeks. Every part of her screamed to stop, but fear pushed her on. The fire's glow came clearer, a single ember of warmth in the vast, pitiless dark. A figure crouched beside it, still as stone. Clara froze. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair tied back with a leather cord. A rifle leaned against a boulder beside him. Untouched, the man's face was unreadable in the flicker of flame, but his eyes caught her breath. Black as obsidian, cold, watchful. And Apache. Clara had heard stories, whispered warnings in town about savages and raids. But this man was no wild raider. There was something different in the stillness of him, something wounded and strong. All at once her instinct screamed to run, but the sky cracked open above her with thunder so fierce it shook the ground. Rain came down in hard, punishing sheets. She stepped closer, lifting her hand in a trembling half-wave. I don't mean any harm, she managed to say over the rain. Please. My horse is spent. I've nowhere else to go. The man didn't move. His gaze swept over her mud-smeared face, bloodied palms, soaked skirts. His expression stayed carved in stone. Lightning flared again, and she saw a scar running from his temple to his jaw. It wasn't the mark of violence, but of memory. Clara's voice broke. Can I stay the night? She whispered. The storm swallowed the words, but somehow he heard. He looked at her for a long, unbearable moment. Then, slowly, he reached for the fire with a stick, shifting a log aside to make space. His silent way of saying yes. She didn't wait for more. Clara sank near the edge of the fire's warmth, wrapping her arms around herself. Steam rose from her wet clothes. The stranger turned back to the flames, unbothered by her presence, his silence thick as the dark. For the first time in days, she felt almost safe as the storm raged outside the little ring of firelight. Clara watched him through half-closed eyes. He didn't speak, didn't even glance at her again, but there was something in the way he sat, solid, grounded, that steadied the trembling in her chest. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled like a dying beast, and under that sound, the whisper of the fire. She didn't know yet that this silent man would change her life, or that his silence hid a story deeper than her own. The storm eased toward midnight, its fury dying into a low, distant rumble. The air smelled of wet sage and smoke. Sharp and clean, the fire burned low, its glow trembling against the canyon walls like a heartbeat. Clara sat with her knees drawn to her chest, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of horse and cedar. She hadn't realized until then that he'd placed it around her shoulders. While she slept, her eyes opened to find him still, awake, still silent, sitting across the fire with his rifle across his knees. His gaze was fixed on the dark mouth of the canyon, as if he were guarding not only the camp but the night itself. For a long time she watched him. The flames carved the lines of his face into copper and shadow. There was no cruelty there, no hunger, No threat, only the kind of stillness that comes after two. Much lost, she cleared her throat softly. "Thank you for letting me stay." He didn't respond. Not with words, but his eyes flicked to hers for a heartbeat, dark, unreadable, and then back to the fire. It was strange. This silence. It wasn't the silence of disdain, nor of indifference. It was something else entirely, a kind of peace. When she offered him the last piece of dried biscuit from her saddlebag, he shook his head once. Instead, he tore a strip from a smoked haunch of venison and held it out to her. The gesture was simple. Almost shy, she hesitated, then took it with both hands, whispering, "Thank you." They ate in quiet. The only sound, the soft pop of the fire and the distant drip of rain off the rocks. After a while, her voice filled the emptiness. "My name's Clara, Clara Bennett." No reply, only the faintest lift of his chin. An acknowledgement. She tried again. "Do you live out here alone?" Still nothing, she sighed. "You're not much for conversation, are you?" The faintest trace of something, amusement, maybe, ghosted across his face. Clara smiled despite herself. "That's all right. I suppose I've done enough talking for two." She found herself speaking softly, telling him about her husband, the small ranch they tried to build before fever took him, about the man who claimed everything afterward, her land, her dignity, and how she'd run before he could claim her. Too, the fire crackled as she talked. He didn't move, didn't look away, but listened, really listened. It was strange how much comfort there was in being heard without interruption, without judgment. "I didn't even take much with me," she murmured, staring into the flames. "Just my horse and a few keepsakes. I thought if I could reach the mountains, maybe I'd find a place where no one knew me, somewhere quiet." Her voice faltered. "I didn't think quiet could be this lonely." A sound broke the silence, not quite a word, but close. She lifted her head. The Apache was watching her, his expression unreadable then. With a slow motion, he pointed toward the east, where the canyon opened to a line of faint dawn light. Clara frowned. "You want me to leave?" He shook his head once, then pointed again, this time to the light. And then to his heart. It took her a moment to understand. He was telling her not all quiet was lonely. Her throat tightened. She nodded, whispering, "I think I understand." They sat that way for a while longer, two strangers, one fire, and the long breath of the desert night easing toward morning. When she finally drifted to sleep, she thought she heard him hum something low and broken, a melody old as the earth itself, and though no words passed between them, Clara felt something shift inside her, the first flicker of trust, the fragile beginning of something neither of them yet dared to name. The dawn came soft and gold over the desert, spreading across the cliffs like spilled honey. Mist curled low over the riverbed, and for a fleeting hour, the world seemed gentled by peace. Clara woke to the smell of wood smoke and the quiet sound of movement. The Apache was already awake, crouched beside the fire, tending to a pot that smelled faintly of coffee and herbs. He glanced up as she stirred, then motioned for her to drink from a tin cup he'd set near the flames. It was bitter, earthy, but warm, the kind of warmth that made her chest ache in the best way. "Thank you," she murmured, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. He nodded once, then rose to check his horse. The animal, a paint moire with one white eye, whickered softly when he touched her flank. Everything about him, the way he moved, breathed, existed, carried a quiet purpose. Clara found herself studying him again. She didn't know his name, but she knew he'd once known sorrow. It hung around him like smoke, but not in a way that frightened her anymore. She smiled faintly. "You should tell me your name someday." He didn't answer, just looked toward the horizon with that same unreadable stillness. Then he stiffened. Clara saw it too, a distant cloud of dust rising along the ridge. At first, it looked like part of the wind, but then sunlight caught Metal Rifle's horses. Her stomach dropped. "No," she whispered. "They found me." He was already moving, fast, efficient, throwing water on the fire, sweeping dirt over the coals, covering their tracks with a skill that made her heart race for a different reason. "How many?" she asked. Voice shaking, he crouched low. Peering over a boulder, he held up 2 fingers then, after a beat. A third 3 men her brother-in-law had sent 3. He gestured sharply. Mount she obeyed, climbing onto his horse as he led his own by the reins within moments. They were weaving through the canyon's winding veins, boots and hooves barely making a sound on the wet stone. The sound of riders echoed faintly behind them. Voices carried, coarse and angry, spread out. She couldn't have gone far. Clara's pulse thundered. She looked down and realized she was gripping his shoulder, the solid muscle beneath his shirt. The faint smell of cedar and smoke, he didn't flinch. Didn't even seem to notice. He was focused entirely on the land ahead. They rode hard until the canyon narrowed to a slit of stone barely wide enough for a man there. He pulled her down and motioned for silence. She crouched beside him. Pressed against the cool rock, the echo of the pursuers drew nearer, the crunch of gravel. The jingle of spurs. Clara's breath came shallow. The Apache moved like a shadow, melting into the cliffside. For a moment, she thought he was gone. Then she saw him above her, perched on the ridge like a hawk. Bow in hand, his movements were smooth, deliberate. He drew. Waited. The first rider came into view, a heavy man with a rifle slung low. A sharp whiz broke the air, and his hat flew clean off, the arrow embedding in the rock beside his head. "Apache!" One of the men shouted. "He's got her!" Gunfire cracked through the canyon. Clara ducked, covering her ears. Hard hammering, the Apache dropped back down beside her. Eyes dark with focus, he pressed a hand to her arm. "We run now." They ran through the tight pass, through brush and stone, until the gunfire faded and only the pounding of their hearts remained when they finally stopped, hidden behind a wall of red rock. Clara gasped for breath. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "You could have left me." He looked at her, long, searching, then simply touched his chest with 2 fingers and pointed at her. It wasn't words, but she understood. "You are under my protection." Her throat tightened. For the first time since she fled her old life, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel in months. Safe, but deep down, she knew the danger wasn't over. The men would return, and next time they wouldn't stop at 3 by nightfall. They'd reach the high country, a hidden place of red cliffs and whispering pines, where the wind moved soft through the trees like prayer. The air smelled of rain and juniper, and the world below felt 1,000 miles away. Clara could barely keep her eyes open. Her legs ached. Her throat burned when the Apache finally stopped beside a narrow cave carved into the rock. She nearly collapsed. He guided her inside without a word. The cave was small but dry, its walls painted with the faint ghosts of old markings, symbols etched by hands long before either of them were born. He built a fire quickly, every motion efficient, practiced when the first sparks caught. He gestured for her to sit, then turned to his pack from it. He drew strips of cloth and a small clay jar she didn't understand until he knelt beside her, dipping a cloth in warm water and reaching for her shoulder, the wound from the earlier gunfight, just a graze, but raw, burned. As he cleaned it, Clara winced, gripping her skirt. "You don't have to." He shot her a look that silenced her, not harsh, but firm when he finished. He smeared the salve over the wound, cool and soothing, then wrapped it carefully. His hands were steady, almost reverent. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're a healer, too." "It seems." He didn't respond, just sat back and stared into the fire. His face, half lit by flame, looked younger for a moment, almost vulnerable. Clara studied him quietly. "You saved me, fed me, risked your life for me, and yet I don't even know your name." His gaze didn't shift. "I know you can hear me," she said softly. "You just don't want to answer." He looked up then, eyes dark and deep as the night sky outside. For a moment, she thought he might speak, but instead, He reached to the wall of the cave and traced one of the old symbols with his fingertip, a circle with 2 lines through it. "What does it mean?" she asked. He hesitated, then pressed his palm flat over the symbol, and finally, in a voice rough from disuse, he whispered, "Home." Clara's breath caught. It wasn't much, a single word, but the sound of it cracked something open in her chest. She spoke carefully. "You haven't spoken in a long time, have you?" He shook his head once, slow. "What happened?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he rose and walked to the mouth of the cave. The moon hung low. Pale as bone, when he finally spoke again, his words were low. "Broken soldiers came long ago. My village burned, my mother, my sister." He paused. The silence between them filled with grief too old for tears. "I lived. I do not know why." Clara swallowed hard. Her throat tight, she wanted to reach for him, but something told her not to. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry." He turned his head slightly, eyes meeting hers. "You are not them." The words hit her harder than she expected. Simple, true. Forgiving, she rose and moved closer. Kneeling beside the fire, "Maybe not, but I've known loss too. I lost a husband and the world I thought was mine." They sat together in silence, the fire's light flickering over their faces outside. The night wind sighed through the canyon, soft, endless, then gently. He said another word, "Taza." She blinked. "Is that your name?" He nodded once. "Taza," she repeated quietly, letting the sound linger on her tongue. "It suits you." His eyes softened for the first time since she'd met him. His lips curved, not quite a smile, but close enough to steal her breath, and in that cave, with only the fire to witness, something unspoken passed between them, not love yet, but the shape of it, waiting to bloom. For the first time in weeks, the world was still. No gunfire, no thunder, only the quiet song of wind through the canyon pines and the soft crackle of the morning fire. Clara sat by the river's edge, her bare feet in the cool water, watching it win through the rocks like liquid glass. The ache in her shoulder had dulled. Her body was healing, but it was her heart that felt most changed behind her. She heard him. Taza, splitting a fallen branch for kindling the rhythm of his work, was steady, calm, every motion purposeful. She'd come to find comfort in the silence between them. How words were never needed for meaning to pass. When she looked back, he was watching her, not boldly, but with quiet curiosity. She smiled and lifted her hands to mimic his earlier gesture, 2 fingers to her heart. Then outward he tilted his head slightly, then gave the smallest nod. She laughed softly. "You see? I'm learning your language." He set down the wood and joined her at the river. For a while, they simply sat side by side, listening to the water and the far-off cry of a hawk. Clara wanted to ask him everything about his life before the silence, about what he dreamed when the fire burned low, but some things she knew didn't need asking. They were written in the way he looked at the horizon, like a man still waiting for something he'd lost. "I used to think the world was simple," she said after a while. "Good men, bad men, right, wrong, but then I met you, and I realized it's not that easy." Taza turned to her, his gaze thoughtful. After a pause, he reached down and drew something in the damp sand, 2 parallel lines crossing at the center. She frowned. "A path?" He nodded. Then, with his fingertip, he drew 2 small circles, 1 on each path, and slowly pushed them together until they became one. Clara's breath caught. 2 lives, 1 road. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. The meaning was clear. She looked away, blinking against the rush of emotion. "You don't make it easy to go back. You know?" He glanced toward the valley below, where the plains stretched for miles, endless and open. Then he pointed toward it, and then back to her, questioning. She understood. Would she go back? "I don't know," she admitted. "There's nothing waiting for me, just ghosts, but if I stay." Her voice trailed off. The unspoken hung between them. The world would never accept what they were becoming before either could say more. A distant echo reached them, a metallic clang, a horse's cry. Taza froze, his head lifting like a wolf's catching a scent. He stood and scanned the canyon ridge. The light shifted, glinting off something far away, a flash of steel soldiers. Clara Whisperetissa nodded once. Jaw tightening, he moved quickly, stamping out the fire. Gathering their few belongings, his calm vanished, replaced by a focused intensity that made her pulse race. "Will they hurt you?" she asked. He paused, then met her gaze. "If they find us, yes." She swallowed hard. "Then we'll go together." Taza hesitated, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, but he didn't argue. Within moments, they were moving again, deeper into the hills. The sun climbed higher, golden light painting the canyon walls as they rode. Clara looked over her shoulder, down toward the valley. The place she'd once called home. She realized she felt nothing. No pull, no belonging. Then she looked at him, the silent warrior beside her, eyes fixed on the horizon, and felt everything. For the first time, she understood the truth the desert had been trying to teach her all along. Home wasn't a place. It was the person who would fight the world to keep you safe. The wind came hard from the west that evening, carrying dust and the scent of rain by the time Taza and Clara reached the upper canyon. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, a blood-red disk swallowed by the horizon they'd been riding all day. Hunted, the soldiers had followed their trail. Closer with every mile. Clara's body ached, her throat dry. But fear was no longer what drove her. It was something stronger, the need not to lose him. They found shelter in a half-collapsed ruin built into the rock, an old mission long forgotten. The bell tower had crumbled years ago, leaving only one wall standing and a rusted cross hanging crooked against the sky. Taza motioned for her to stay low while he checked the ridge. His movements were silent, every sense sharpened by instinct. Clara watched him from the shadows. The man who had once been a ghost among his own people, now risking everything for a woman who'd wandered into his firelight when he returned. His expression told her all she needed to know. They were surrounded. "How many?" she whispered. He held up 5 fingers. Clara's heart thudded. "You can't fight them all." He said nothing, only reached out and brushed his fingers across her cheek, a gesture so tender, so final, that her breath caught. "No," she said fiercely, shaking her head. "You're not doing this alone." His eyes met hers, calm, resolute. Then, in that low, gravel-soft voice she'd come to crave, he said, "You stay, I end this." She caught his wrist. "Taza, don't. If you go out there, you won't come back." For a heartbeat, his face softened. "Then I will not come back," he said simply. "But you will live." She shook her head, tears spilling despite herself. "I didn't run all this way to lose you in the end." Outside, the thunder of hooves drew nearer. Shadows flickered against the rocks. Soldiers on horseback, rifles gleaming in the dying light. Taza turned to go, but Clara moved in front of him, pressing her palm against his chest. "If you walk out there, you'll die for nothing. Let me stand beside you, please." He looked down at her, really looked, and something inside him broke the mask of silence of the stoic warrior, fell away. He cupped her face in both hands, thumb brushing her jaw, eyes fierce with emotion. He'd never spoken then. Softly, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of truth, the kind that says, "I see you, I choose you, I would die for you if I must." When he pulled away, his voice was barely a whisper. "You did not tame me. Clara, you made me remember how to live." Gunfire shattered the moment. A bullet struck the rock near her head, sending chips flying. He turned, firing back with quick precision. Drawing their attention away from her, Clara grabbed his rifle when it emptied, reloading with trembling hands. Together, they fought, side by side, heart against fear, until the echoes of battle faded into the mountains. When it was over, smoke hung low. The soldiers lay still, their horses scattered into the storm, but Taza was on his knees, blood darkening his side. Clara fell beside him, catching his head against her chest. "No, no, don't you dare," she whispered. "Not after everything." He lifted a weak hand. Brushing her hair from her face, his breath came shallow. But his eyes, oh, his eyes were clear. "Can I stay the night?" She whispered through tears. The words trembling with memory, his lips curved faintly. "The ghost of a smile you already have?" The wind rose. Carrying the scent of rain and juniper, he exhaled once, slow, peaceful, and the canyon fell silent again when dawn came. The storm had passed the valley below. Shimmered in gold, they said later that no one ever found the bodies, only the prints of 2 horses leading into the high country, and the whisper of a campfire that never quite went out. And sometimes, when the desert wind moves through the canyons, the people say they can still hear a woman's soft voice and a man's low answer, words carried on forever like love that never learned how to die.